I believe the children are our future. Well, I also believe that the children are our past too. So we're going to be talking about connecting with our inner child. Yes, 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 we are. I'm excited. I had to hit it with the giddy. You know what I'm saying? I had to hit it with the song that also was used for my christening party. Okay. The theme song to my christening party. The VHS was that song. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Shout out to Whitney Houston. So we're talking about connecting with our inner child, and I appreciate everybody just reaching out to me, talking about how much they got from the past episodes because I've been talking about inner child stuff since the beginning, because I just strongly believe that that is the root of the work. So, if you click this, it's because you support me or whatever, and you want to be knowing about my powers, you know what I'm saying? But also because you might have been like, oh, I want to hear more about connecting with the inner child and healing. So, inner child work, it is a metaphor, it is describing a healing journey. It represents a healing journey that allows us to go deep, deep, deep inside to our true, authentic selves, to explore the parts of us that were rejected, the parts of us that were abandoned, the parts of us that were told that we were too much, not enough, unworthy, lovable, but also the parts of us, because inner child work, it does land there oftentimes. And I also want to say that it also includes the parts that felt joyful in our childhood and imaginative and playful and curious and trusting and creative and free. Remember that childhood freedom, even if you felt it for moments, just brief moments. Maybe it was like your favorite dessert if y'all had dessert. Because poverty was real. Dessert always sounds really fancy to me, but I guess, if you get an ice cream sandwich at the end of a dinner, I guess that's a dessert, right? But like what your favorite snack was, what your favorite candy bar was, if you had access to any of those things, maybe it was a game that you played outside. Cause I definitely come from the generation where we actually played outside, So it's part of that too. And we'll get to that because the inner child healing allows us to really tap into those beautiful parts too, even if they felt short and not really indicative of our entire childhood. Those moments, we hold on, we hold them close. And healing our inner child is important because it helps us to transform our relationships with others. And most importantly, the relationship and connection with ourselves. A lot of us have a wounded inner child inside of us, which is why inner child healing feels as important as it does for a lot of the spiritual folk. Because I want you to think about if you have a wounded inner child inside of you. So I want you to ask yourself these questions. Were all of your needs met as a child? And I mean emotionally, physically, all of the types of needs, not wants, but needs. Were they met as a child? Did you feel emotionally and physically safe in your environment? Did you experience a traumatic event? Now, some people really feel like the word trauma doesn't belong to them. They're like, nope, what you mean? I'm fine. I'm shining. I'm feeling good about myself. Ain't got no trauma. What? I want to let you know something. I'm going to get real close to the mic. If you are a Black person in this world, you have experienced some form of trauma. If nobody ever told you, I'm telling you this today. Okay. And if you have that wounded inner child inside of you, as the way that I do, you may carry some negative beliefs about yourselves. And those negative beliefs often come from our childhood. Sometimes when I think negative thoughts, I'm like, who said that? Who said I shouldn't do that? Who said I couldn't wear that? Who said I couldn't be that? Yeah, someone in my childhood said that I couldn't, shouldn't, can't. We may find ourselves in the same difficult, challenging situations over and over and over again, repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, not always recognizing that there is a pattern that was what? Formed in our childhood. Now let's get to these wounds, child. Let's get to these wounds, child. Get it? Get it? Because you're talking about inner child wounds. Yeah, you got it. You laughed. So there are actually four core wounds. Now, I want you, that alone can have its own podcast or two for each wound. I mean, for real. So do your own work, y'all. There are four wounds around this, and they indicate that the healing work is critical. It's giving alert, 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 alert. So the four wounds are an abandonment wound. So that's like if you feel like you're left out of things, do you fear being left out of things? That's the abandonment wound. The neglect wound, do you fear being vulnerable and opening up? Do you struggle with letting things go? Well, that's the neglect wound. Then the third one, we have the guilt wound. So if you say sorry often, you feel like you did something wrong often. You feel uncomfortable asking for things. Well, that is the guilt wound. And lastly, out of the four core wounds, there's the trust wound. Are you afraid to be hurt? Do you find reasons to not trust other people? Baby, well, the trust wound into the chat if that's you. Now, sound familiar? Well, twin, where have you been? Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening and tapping in and pressing play on this episode because this is for you. Look at your neighbor because, neighbor, we can all relate. This episode is for all of us. I think about those wounds specifically because while a lot of the times where I'm at right now at 36 in this current moment, I feel like a lot of those wounds I have faced, I have slayed, I have conquered, I have overcome. Truly. Shout out to therapy. Shout out to doing the actual work that comes along with being in therapy. However, these things can activate at any time. Just because you have worked on it doesn't mean that there won't be moments where you feel abandonment, where you feel neglect, where you feel guilt. And that's why the inner child healing is so important because you're able to feel those things and figure out the root and go right back on back to your healing journey. Go back on your healing journey. Cause I've had moments recently, I would say in the last year of my life, where I'm like, ooh, I thought I worked on that wound. Ooh, I'm triggered by seeing this wound. Y'all, as I'm saying this, I'm literally rubbing my chest right now. Because I'm thinking about that. Like, I did so much work, but how the hell did I get back here? So, yeah, it happens. Healing is not linear. So, when we tap into heal our inner child, when we do that work, we can uncover why we react the way that we do to situations and events, and really make those connections to the patterns that were formed in our childhood. And it's so important to do that work. It's so important to do that like past work. Because how you going to know who you are today and want to be if you don't tap into who you were? How you going to know who you are and want to be if you don't tap into who you were? So the first step of doing inner child work is acknowledging your inner child. The innocent, tender, fragile, gentle, trusting part of you. He, she, or they want to be loved unconditionally. They want to feel protected. They want to feel cared for. And so once you acknowledge that inner child, baby, and you do this shadow work to really like figure out why you are the way that you are, let me tell you what is probably going to happen to you. You're going to feel enlightened. More on that later. It's going to make, you're going to make connections all the time. But the unhealed people in your friend group, maybe your partner group, maybe people at work, if they are not on that similar journey, they will be like, you stay living in the past. You are so, everything means something deeper to you. And naturally, because this work does mean that you will be hypersensitive because you're constantly making connections. And while that might seem daunting, what it also is healing. Cause you get like a perfect blueprint. I'm like, oh, that's why I'll be doing that. Okay, so then boom. How can I shift the behaviors that I no longer want? Come on, somebody. So you know me. I love to be vulnerable. I love to have you all up in my business because I truly believe that when we are vulnerable and when we're open, we make space for people to be vulnerable and open with themselves. That's the work. I truly believe that is the work. So I have 5 personal examples, stories, things that happen in my life that I want to share with y'all. And some, if you're listening to this and you know me, you might know some of these. If you've listened to some examples I might have shared in previous episodes, these might sound a little similar. I want you to also think about 5 scenarios in your life as well, where you can recognize key points. And I'll give you a couple of like thought-provoking questions to maybe formulate these scenarios in your head, but just thinking about these examples. So, example 1 for me, self-soothing. So when I was a child, I was always told to go to another room and calm down, aka stop crying. So till this day, my number one comfort space is solitude. I mean, ideally, if I can remove myself and go in another room, I mean, I really, and it's interesting because it can seem conflict avoidant. It could seem, I mean, there's so many different things that it could seem to other people, but that self-soothing, that finding that comfort space for me within myself that really requires just the self is something that 100% came from my childhood. And being told to go calm down in another room had 2 impacts. One, I realized that people who don't feel comfortable openly expressing their emotions will shame you and shun you for your feelings that are out loud. They like, hey, turn that down, put that away, wipe that away, because they're literally uncomfortable. That is also why I have an EP coming out this year that's called Healing Out Loud, because it's so important that if that's your makeup, because for me, that's very much my makeup is to share and to express. I found that people feel uncomfortable with that. So what that did was made me realize that some people just truly prefer to not express and they feel uncomfortable when you express around them. So that taught me that. The second impact was realizing that self-regulation and self-soothing is critical. And they ended up giving me the space to explore what that meant for me, which is one of the main reasons I have a secure attachment. And I'm not perfect, but I've taken those attachment quizzes and I scored pretty high in security. And I know that this is probably one of the main reasons why. So in that scenario, you're able to kind of think through the different things that came up, right? What I was potentially feeling, being emotional, being told to go somewhere else, which has that double impact of like rejection and not feeling like I can express, but also realizing, oh, y'all got an issue with it, ain't me. So I'm gonna be over here self-soothing and self-regulating because clearly that's gonna help me when I'm older. Another example was not going low. I witnessed adults in my household say the meanest things to each other for the sole intention of breaking them down. And as a child, I was like, what? I took things so literally. My grandmother, she would get upset with my mother and I'm laughing because I just felt my grandmother be like, don't you dare tell this business. My grandmother passed, y'all. A little bit of that family things being like, keep the business inside. When Black folks are conditioned to keep the business inside, I want you to really laugh at that internally and be like, ooh, look at me breaking generational curses. But anywho, my grandmother used to tell my mother, like, you and your kids get the fuck out whenever she would be angry. And I took it very literally. And so I would pack my things. I was ready to go. I was like, Mom, I thought we got to go. She was like, oh, no, she don't really mean that. And I realized that in anger, mean things were said, knowing that my mom didn't have the money to go anywhere, right? Knowing that she knew that she didn't mean it, it was going to just end up being okay later on. I, till this day, refuse to go low in conflict. I'm like, I have a floor on how low I go with someone because I know what that feels like. And I also know how hard it is to repair and come back from that. And, I had a whole episode on apologies. Baby, once you go super, super, super low where me, you can keep your apologies. Cause I'm like, I don't even hear you. You went so low. So I just know that comes from my childhood. Third example, protection. As a child, I was the protector. I was a protector of friends. I remember getting into a fight in 8th grade because my friend was getting beat up, y'all. Yeah. And so I remember jumping in and like pushing the friend out the way and things like that. And it was this piece of like really wanting to make sure my friends were good, you know, fighting on behalf of my cousin and getting into stuff, you know what I mean? But I, as a result, rarely felt protected. And so I didn't have like slew of people I could hit up and fight on my behalf or take up for me on some like, don't you treat Jewel like that. Don't do her. I never had that. So till this day, when I don't receive that type of protection, I remember what I felt like as a child who constantly gave that protection but never had it given back to me. And so what that meant was give it to yourself. Wow, that's another part of my secure attachment. Realizing that people have a limited capacity. They can only do what they can do. And honestly, as I'm even thinking through these, I'm like, wow, well, I've had to kind of learn these things along the way. Fourth example, cooking. I was taught to cook primarily by my grandmother. And one of the first things I remember her teaching me how to make was scrambled eggs. And my grandmother told me the steps. So I turned on the stove, placed the pan on top of it, and I went to the next room and watched my shows because I didn't remember how long she said to keep the pan on the stove before I add the oil. So I just said, I'm gonna go watch my shows in between. So clearly the stove is on, the pan is on it. It got hot. I come back a few minutes later, I think a few minutes later, and immediately dropped the oil in the pan, like my grandmother said. And it went up in smoke. And my grandmother came rushing in. And ever since then, I would burn things regularly. My food was always something my family members teased me about. So whether I didn't get the texture right on rice was so hard for me to make, which is probably one of the main reasons why I love it now. And while I enjoy making it now, and each and every time I make it and it comes out good, I'm like, yes, let's go. My inner child was like, let's go, you did it. So, it was something that they always tease me about, like, oh, do not have Jewel cook. Don't do it. And so the only time I enjoyed cooking was for my brother because the adults in my family, like, just weren't having it. They didn't like it. And so they would be like, cook for your brother. And I would experiment in the kitchen. I'll make all these concoctions. And till this day, I'd rather not cook for others because I realize my palate is different. And my inner child was crushed by those critiques. And so if I cook for you, that is a major act of love because that definitely comes from that childhood experience, of being shunned in that way and being critiqued in that way. And my mom was such a great cook. And so to have a mother who was a really, really great cook and she would like taste my food and be like, ugh, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh my gosh, so bad. So bad. All right. Last personal scenario. So connecting with emotionally unavailable people with predominant masculine energy. So my dad, my brother, my uncles, these were people who were in my life who didn't share a lot and had a lot of walls up. And I was usually left feeling like a private eye, trying to unveil how they really felt. And I usually use this kind of lead by example approach, which then left me feeling like I'm connecting with y'all, but y'all not connecting back. And honestly, if I do some deep healing work on that, I think that there is some root in rejection because it's like, look at me, I'm opening up. What about you? And then they don't open up. So there is that initial feeling of rejection, but I didn't let it get me down. I was like, all right, I'm going to keep going. And I would essentially end up enabling that closed off behavior. So if you're not expressing how you feel with emotions, I will then try to figure out how you feel and then bring it up and ask you these like thought provoking questions because I know you feel comfortable there. But then I'll bring in some feeling questions in there. And then I'll be like, okay, so are you saying that you feel I was just like really making a lot of space for feelings, and people just they just seemed annoyed, but then they also seemed secretly like, I kind of like that you asked me these questions, but also stop asking me these questions. It was so weird as a child. So so yeah, I think that like I wanted to connect with different men in my life, but I just saw that they had these walls up that kind of made it hard, and I just kept trying. And so in my current stage of adulthood, because I've definitely had different stages of adulthood where I was still enabling people, but in my current stage of adulthood, I just rather encourage people to share and, you know, create that open space, not a safe space, because I can't guarantee it's going to be safe, but I can guarantee an open space and you share when you're ready and, you know, really encourage that person to be in the driver's seat of expressing because I don't want to feel like I'm an emotional caretaker, which I felt a lot of the times as a child. So that was y'all being in my business. And like I said, hopefully you were able to see through those 5 personalized examples. And I'm gonna really, you know, inner child healing is gonna be embedded through a lot of these episodes. So feel free to, you know, strap in, tap in, tune up, tune in, because that's gonna definitely come up as a theme. And so you might be like, all right, Joel, so how do I tap in? How do I tap in to heal it? So guess what, y'all? If you're a heady person and you think very logically, you know, that part of the brain, nah, that's not this work. Because if you think about when you're a child, I study child development. When you think about children, baby stages, newborn infant stages, they explore the world from a body based perspective. They feel things out with their body, very sensory, very somatic, very intuitive. So it's not head work, y'all. Your subconscious and your woo woo energy is the driver here. So the ways you can tap into your inner child is recognizing that that's going to be body-based, intuitive work. It's soft work. It's very deep feeling work. So I encourage you to think about some ways that you can just exercise that thought, feeling, mushy part of you before you even get here, because this is where you got to be the mushiest. So there's different ways. If you're ready to tap in and do the work and put the subconscious person in the driver's seat, then let's go. You can create a timeline if you have a hard time remembering dates and sequencing of events. So you can literally create a timeline like parents separated at this point, at this age. And even if you don't know the exact age, you could say like maybe the year that you were in school. You might be like 5th grade graduation, parents fought and embarrassed me at graduation. Damn, that might have really happened to me. That sounds real familiar. So you can also journal from the perspective of your inner child. So not as your adult self, but as if you were from that inner child perspective. Another way to tap in is having a conversation with your inner child. Where are the people who talk to themselves? Hey, that's me. My hand is up, waving. Have a conversation with your inner child. You can say it out loud. You can do it like in an audio version, you know, out loud. You can record it. You also could write a letter to your inner child as your adult self. So, you know, the previous one you're writing as your child, like as your child self. This one you're talking to your child self as your adult self. Got it? Good. Another way is to eat some of your favorite foods from your childhood. For me, a box mac and cheese with hot dogs, and I'm vegan, y'all. So I get the box smacking vegan cheese and vegan hot dogs. Yes, a little bit older in my childhood, I was obsessed with corn, like sweet corn, preferably canned or some sort of like not like necessarily on the cob, mashed potatoes, and some sort of meat. That was so to this day, oh babes, yeah, babes, eating that. You might want to play games that you played as a child. And it could be Uno, y'all. You know, adults love to play Uno. When adults come together and play Uno, we tapping into our inner child. If you play that as a child in some way, yeah. And inner child, y'all don't have to mean 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. We're also children when we're teenagers to an extent, right? So, yeah. You can also watch shows you enjoyed as a child. I'm really convinced that adults who love watching like older cartoons, that this is that inner child work. So inner child work, doesn't have to be, it could be come on now, eating some of your favorite foods and snacks. I think that's probably why a lot of y'all still go to McDonald's. Cause y'all remember getting them damn Happy Meals when y'all was a kid. Cause I remember when I was young, my mother, whenever me and my brother, we did something, in school that was really good, which was all the time, period. We was smart. She'd be like, all right, I'm going to treat y'all to McDonald's, and we would get a Happy Meal. So, yeah, I think that's why a lot of us still go to them drive-thrus because our inner child be really craving that horrible for you fast food. We crave it. We crave it. Some of us still got that McDonald's fry that we had when we was in 3rd grade, still living inside of our body because it doesn't decompose. But I digress. If you really, really want to get into it on a deeper way, you can also tap in by visualizing a childhood event. You can go into like a meditative state when you do this. You can visualize it. And so when I mean visualize is think about what was happening, how old you were, what did you have on, where were you? Were you at an aunt's house, cousin's house? What were the sounds? Did you hear people laughing? What feelings came up for you? What did the environment smell like? Was there a perfume smell that felt lingering in the room? What was going on with your family dynamic at the time? Who was around? Was there a sibling that was here for this event that happened in your life? So you can go as detailed as you want, y'all. And this makes me think about a research-based study that said that even listening to music from a particular part and era of our life can like bring back nostalgia. So we know those songs about that breakup. You're like, damn. But those feel good songs. So maybe there was a childhood event of like you went to your first party and that one song that you remembered dancing with your friends to, and you were like, yo, this song is everything. Right? So visualizing that event and thinking about that song, thinking about your friends who was around you, all of that could be really helpful to really tap in to some inner child healing work. And, once you tap in and get comfortable with sitting with the discomfort, like I said earlier, be prepared to constantly make connections. Like the other day, a snack wasn't where it would usually be. And I immediately thought about how it felt as a child when my mom would hide all the really, really good snacks from me and my brother. She would hide it in the closet. She would just hide it in these like areas. And then at night, I would just hear her watching Sex in the City. And literally just chomping on some Nutter Butter cookies. Some Nutter Butter cookies was so good and they smelled so good. Smell it. Even if you got a peanut allergy, smell it. That Nutter Butter peanut butter was smelling so good. Yeah, I got a smell. And she was just chomping on it. And I used to feel so bad. Me and my brother used to be like, damn, why she do us like that? Why she ain't share the cookies with us? Why she be hiding the cookies? And so, okay, let me get back to my present self. So as soon as those feelings came up for me, I was able to identify it and find the root of my emotions. And so this is good when we think about that, because remember I told you that I was an emotional private eye for other people and trying to figure out how you feel. How do you feel? What are you feeling? How are you feeling? And not to like emotional monitor, because emotional monitoring is rooted in trauma. If you emotionally monitor people and you're always asking them how they feel, that is rooted in trauma. I ain't talking about that. But constantly asking people to tap into their feelings, right? Instead of me being the emotional private eye for other people, now I'm that for myself. And it's so liberating. And the answer is yes to the question that you have in your mind. I did find the snacks. Okay. All was well. All was well. I did find the snacks. So, you know, I'm really hoping that you are going to do the work. If you don't know what the 4 core wounds are that I mentioned at the beginning, that you do that work and you figure out what are the other ways to tap into this work and why you may realize that this work is so important and critical for you. I'm hoping that this episode helped with that. And I want to leave you with this affirmational power, right? This reminder that you have the power to create a new relationship with your inner child. You can create a safe and secure place, one that is filled with all the love and healing that you, as younger you, desired and wanted and craved, and one that is fulfilling to the current you that you also desire and crave, because the love and healing is for all of us at all ages. Thank you for tapping into the Power Portal.